Welcome to This Is Money podcast, sponsored by Charles Stanley Direct. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and Simon Lambert today is Lee Boyce. And coming up, when tax rises don't always bring in more cash for the Treasury coffers. As the government weighs up introducing yet another tax, this time a wealth tax, we explore why, despite the allowance being slashed, the capital gains tax take is down. And what does that mean for the Chancellor's plans? Also today, who wants to be a millionaire? We offer expert tips on how to build more wealth wherever you live in the UK. What would you ask a financial advisor right now? We explore the 6 burning questions that people are wanting to know, and we get the expert answers. Plus, we look at a creative way to get round inheritance tax. But would it work? Don't forget, you can stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app.
Take control of your finances with Charles Stanley Direct. Invest, save, coach, or plan. Using technology where it's helpful and people where it matters. Our website and app make trading cost-effective and flexible. But we're more than just an online investment service. We're here for you regardless of your financial needs or if your life takes an unexpected turn. Your finances, your way. Take control today with Charles Stanley Direct. Sign up now.
Investment involves risk.
But first, the UK tax burden is at the highest it's been since the Second World War. We know this, and yet the government seems determined to find ways to take even more of our hard-earned cash. The idea, being widely mooted at the moment, is a wealth tax. Now, we already pay 37 levies, yes, 37, which amounts to an average of 57% for the average household's income. Don't believe us? This Is Money have listed them all on their website. But will more taxes bring in more cash for the government? The latest capital gains tax receipts suggest that might not always be the case. But before we get to that, Simon, welcome. Lee, 37 taxes.
I know this story actually is something that had been on my mind for quite a long time, because I think a lot of people think about their tax, how much they pay in tax when it comes to their salary, and whether you're an additional rate payer, higher rate payer, or a basic rate payer, and how much of your salary gets sort of swallowed up by that. I think lots of us are kind of, well attuned to how much of our take-home pay is eaten up by tax. But there's lots of additional bits and bobs that really add up. And I think if you sat down with a calculator and worked out what your true tax take is, you might be quite surprised. And I think you wouldn't be surprised to hear me saying this, because I've been going on about this for quite a while, that I think that there's a kind of tipping point of people fed up with the amount of tax that they're paying. And I think we're really seeing that at the moment. I can't move for the amount of social media posts of move to Dubai, it's tax-free. I mean, it's, it's just like, but you kind of understand it when you've got, especially middle earners, just feeling like tax is just up and up. So this story I thought was really interesting, because it went into real detail about how much is swallowed up by tax, because it isn't just income tax. Now, income tax is number 1. So it's like listed from 1 to 37 here and on the size of it. And it's done on an average per household. So of course, averaging everything out, gives a very broad picture, which is why I say you need to sit down with a calculator to work out your own tax take. But income tax is £10,631 per average household. Number 2 is national insurance at £6,070. I don't think either of those two would come as a surprise to be 1, 2. And number 3 is value added tax, VAT, £6,025. So that's not too far off national insurance, pretty similar. They are the 3 biggest by some way. And then you start going down, and this is where I start saying it's the taxes that because they don't come directly out of your pay, you might not necessarily club it all together. So number 4 is council tax, £1,768 now is the average. Again, this week I feel like there's been lots of social media posts about council tax, in particular Jay at the In-Betweeners talking about a charge for his green bin, which I think a lot of us are starting to feel the pain of. I pay council tax. Why am I having to pay extra for my green bin now? And that seems to be the latest move from councils. Number 5, corporation tax, 1,448. Then we start getting to the taxes that are kind of under £1,000 per year, but add up. So fuel duty, £869. Business rates, £880. Stamp duty. Okay, not everyone buys a home every year, but it's a big bill if you do. And in 2024-25, there was a £13.8 billion stamp duty bill. That's an average of £489 per household if you smooth it out over everyone. Capital gains tax, £460. Alcohol taxes, £436. Vehicle excise duty, £320. My pet hate insurance premium tax is number 12 on this list, £313. If you have insurance, which most of us would have insurance when it comes to household insurance, travel insurance, car insurance, £8.9 billion the government rates in from IPT last year. It gets passed on directly to consumers. It's a crazy amount of money to do the right thing and get insured. Tobacco duty, I think this has fallen a little bit, but £279. Student loan repayments, again, this is smoothed out over all households, so £199. And custom duty is £173. That's just the top 15. To tell you other things that are in it and how much detail there is in this, number 19, for example, TV licence, that's definitely a tax. The climate change levy at number 23, that's costing £63 a year. Plastic packaging tax, £10.
Yeah. So when you said people might be surprised at this, Lee, you didn't mean, oh, thanks, a bunch of flowers surprise. You meant
it's not a cheery read, because this really does just pile into how much we are getting taxed and how much more could we possibly be taxed and what could come up in the budget in a couple of months' time. Because where else do you tax us? The total taxes per average household, according to this, is £31,623.
And shortly, you made a good point about the bins. Just extra little bits wherever we can. New parking charges in the local high street. And it just feels like there's so much. There's not even just taxes, it's the additional extras.
It's just the extras and the extras that, you might not typically say it's a tax, or you might not think of it as a tax, but really it is a tax. It's charges and things that you can't get around for how you're living. And I think that's where people are starting to really feel a bit annoyed about things. Council tax is already number 4 in this list, and it's going up and up and up. And now we're being asked to do the additional things. Starts with a green waste bin. Where does it end? So, listen, I kind of been banging this drum for a while now, with the frozen thresholds when it comes to high rate taxpayers, especially. I think people were just kind of moving up their career ladder and then feeling quite hard done by when it feels like you are being penalised for doing well in your career, and everything is just adding up, and the amount of money you actually end up with at the end of the month is probably not what you truly deserve.
I don't think people would mind if they thought that local services were getting a lot better, for example, and generally services were getting better, but it doesn't really feel like they are. Simon, before we get to capital gains tax, one area that's being looked at quite deeply, I don't know how true that is, or it's just what we're reading in all the papers, but is a wealth tax. Now, obviously, that's not going to affect the average household, but again, another tax. What's a wealth tax, Simon?
A wealth tax is an idea that is very popular with certain campaigners, largely on the left, who argue that basically accumulated wealth and people being able to live off accumulated wealth and not taxing them is unfair, because those people with incomes who rely on their incomes are taxed and those people with wealth are not. It comes in various forms. One that has been suggested is a 2% tax on people who have more than 10 million. But the problem is there's not that many people who have more than 10 million, and they tend to be quite mobile. So then you start saying, oh, well, maybe we should put a tax on people who have more than 2 million instead. Then you start dragging people into it who potentially might not consider themselves to be wealthy. And we're going to talk about this later, how much people feel they need to be wealthy nowadays. But if you take a scenario where somebody lives in a certain part of the country, a not that huge mansion-like impressive house could be taking you well over the million into the 1.5 million stakes. And then if they don't have a mortgage on it, because you'd have to presume that you're taking off the mortgage, and then you add on, are we going to include their pension pots? That's included in inheritance tax now, and then their savings. All of a sudden you see people ticking over that 2 million who probably wouldn't be considered to be the super rich and the people for whom a wealth tax is talked about being targeted at. And the people for whom all of that wealth came from income that was already taxed. And this is where you start to get a problem. Now, you could argue, and you can argue, that, for example, house price wealth, which makes up a lot of people's wealth, is not earned. That's thanks to house price inflation. However, the people who have benefited from that house price inflation have dealt with the consequences of that house price inflation. They've paid the mortgages over the years. If they're of our generation and they live in expensive homes, then they will have had to take out a massive mortgage, a multiple of the mortgages that their parents' generations had to take out, and will be paying huge amounts every month in mortgage payments and interests. And the only winners from that are the banks and the building societies. If it's our parents' generation, they went through the 10% interest rates era. Now, they are the generation that has benefited the most from high house price inflation, but they're now having to hand over money to their children and their grandchildren because due to that high house price inflation and low wage growth, they can't get onto the property ladder. Now, there was some who say, well, look, this is just completely unfair and actually it's skewed towards parts of the country and we need to redistribute this. But then some of this is already being redistributed because we already have taxes on wealth. Inheritance tax, we had figures yesterday. The number of people who were caught in the inheritance tax net has doubled, I believe, in the last decade, and it's going to go up a lot more once pensions get dragged into it. Capital gains tax, we'll talk about that in a minute. Tax on savings. The threshold on savings, the personal savings allowance, hasn't risen since it was introduced. It's £1,000 for basic rate taxpayers. It's only £500 for higher rate taxpayers, and there's a lot more of them nowadays because people have been fiscally dragged up the tax bands. And additional rate taxpayers, of which there are also a lot more nowadays, don't get a savings allowance at all. You then got the income tax thing where, as I said, we're dragging more people into higher rate tax. We're dragging more people into the 60% tax trap. If that £100,000 limit had risen since it was introduced, it'd be about £180,000 now. It's just this general squeeze that Lee was talking about. And then you bring in things like council tax, etc. Car tax. I mean, okay, I realise I am an outlier here, right? I have 3 cars, which is excessive, okay? But like one of them is a classic car that doesn't get driven much. The other one is a nearly 20-year-old car that doesn't get driven that much. And then we've got our family car. We fork out £110 a month in car tax. I mean, this is out of choice. Don't feel sorry for me here, but you know, it's still a lot of money. Council tax, 325 quid a month we're paying for council tax. And then to go back to the point you made earlier, you know, our local council, St Albans District Council, in its wisdom, in the town that I live in, which is not St Albans, has decided to bring in parking charges in order to raise more revenue. This was a place that parking wasn't really a problem and was one of the few towns that actually had a relatively thriving high street. Now, if you drive down there on a Saturday afternoon, I mean, it's great because you can definitely park. I'm not so sure that's really that good for the businesses. But the council says, no, it's fine. It's all working fine. It's all working fine. But the council has to do this because the council doesn't have a choice, because the council tax system is totally broken. We collect money from councils. It all goes centrally and then it gets redistributed around the country and they get, you know, much less than they bring in. But we can't do anything about the council tax system because government's worried about doing anything about it. And also then it's just going to end up hitting those people who are already paying all the taxes anyway. We've said we're not going to raise all these other taxes. We won't go into that again, but we've kind of stuck in what has been described as a bit of a doom loop. And I do think that we've got to the point where some of these taxes and some of these tax increases, especially the stuff which I've described before as a budget airline tax system, where we're keeping the headline price low with this promise not to raise, you know, national insurance, income tax, etc. But then we're just trying to get people on extras everywhere else, you know. And I think it's counterproductive. And just to say, actually, you know, when it comes to paying taxes, I don't have any problem paying tax. I don't like paying taxes. I'm not a masochist, right? But I don't have any problem paying my taxes. And I consider myself to be very lucky. And I have no problem with an income tax system that steps up the scale as your earnings go up and sees the highest earners pay more and so on. What I do have a problem with is the mess of a tax system that we have, the way it treats people unfairly at their various points through it, and the way that it is counterproductive in some of those things where you're just like, if you just sorted this stuff out, it would sort of improve things. I mean, as I've said before, the cottage industry and people trying to earn less money at certain points in order to keep their incomes below certain thresholds is not a good thing to have.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's massively overcomplicated. And the problem is when we have a budget, which we do coming up, which is why we're talking a lot about tax, is there's loads of tinkering around. It's like, what could come next? All of this change. And let's talk about capital gains tax. Of course, we've had the allowance slashed. And then in the spring statement, the Chancellor increased the rates at which you pay it. It feels like very arbitrary and anything is gained, Simon. And if you want people to play by the rules, because a lot of people don't, you need to make it simple. You need to make it feel fair. And I think at the moment it feels neither of those things.
I would agree with you. And on this capital gains tax thing, there is this suggestion that tax raids don't always raise the tax take. It's a warning that gets regularly sounded to governments. It is one that is rarely heeded. It's easy to ignore because you can say, well, it's just vested interests who don't want the tax to rise. And actually, in many cases, it is just vested interests who don't want the tax to rise. And the statement comes with relatively little supporting evidence because it's quite difficult to actually find the supporting evidence. But there is one tax that we have managed to meddle with so many times over the years that catches enough people in its net and also offers the opportunity to change your behaviour that provides some very, very interesting statistics on this. And that's capital gains tax. So there was a big cut in the capital gains tax allowance made by former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt that kicked in the 2023 to 2024 tax year. It was slashed from £12,300 to £6,000. That was a huge cut. Tory Chancellor, just to say, Jeremy Hunt. Now, that was actively aimed at raising revenue when we did this sort of slightly mad thing of trying to claw back too much money too quickly post-COVID pandemic lockdowns. But some HMRC data that was out last week showed that actually capital gains tax receipts tanked by 18% to 12.1 billion that year, which is the opposite of what should have happened. Now, this is people either deciding not to sell or it suddenly alerted them to capital gains tax in a way that it wouldn't have done. So they started doing things in a more tax efficient way. They put more money into ISAs where they wouldn't have capital gains tax. Or when they were selling investments, they spread them over tax years. They passed stuff to their spouses. So, because you can do that free of capital gains tax, things like this, it basically changed people's behavior to the point where effectively by cutting the allowance by that much, it was a big tax hike, but actually we got less money in. Now, the following tax year, the capital gains tax allowance was halved again to just £3,000. It is pitiful compared to what it was. That means that people with even relatively modest profits should be caught in its net. People like with work share save schemes, investments held outside of ISAs, people lucky enough to hold Rolls-Royce shares, that kind of thing. Yet there was some separate provisional HMRC figures that indicate that the capital gains tax take tumbled another 10% in 2024 to 2025. And that's before Rachel Reeves's hike in the rate kicked in, which came in the autumn budget. And it doesn't bode well for the forecasts that, this capital gains tax take is going to keep rising and giving us more money. It actually seems to indicate that it might be something that's backfired.
So people are just sat on selling anything, right? Is that what you're suggesting? That's what's causing this? Or they're being a bit more strategic about it? Or
it's a combination of the two things. It's raised awareness dramatically. It's encouraged people to do tax saving things that they might not otherwise have done. But also, it's a big hit. So if you've got someone who's got a £15,000 profit on some shares, now that is a big profit on some shares, but maybe on a lot of different shareholdings that they're going to sell. Previously, they could have got £12,300 of that tax-free, and if they were a higher rate taxpayer, they'd pay 20% on the remaining £2,700. So that's a £540 tax bill. So you're like, okay, well, I'm making a £15,000 profit. I pay £540 worth of tax. Fine. I'll sell. By the time Jeremy Hunt had finished with things, and the capital gains tax allowance was in tatters at £3,000, they would be taxed on £12,000, and they would face a £2,400 bill. So people look at that and go, well, I'm not going to sell. I don't want to pay £2,400 in tax. No, they're still making a profit. They're still making more than they're paying out in tax. But that's not how people's brains work. You go back to this behavioural finance stuff and it stops people from selling. I've had so many conversations with people about this. So, well, I'm not selling now. I'd have to pay too much in tax. And they sit there and they think, well, do you know what? At some point, they might reverse this. They might get another government who ups the allowance or lowers the rate. And actually, do you know what? I don't really need the money now. I'll just sit on it. So they sit on it. And yeah, it changes people's behavior.
I mean, I keep hearing speculation or suggestions about bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax. So it doesn't look like it's going backwards to a better time. It looks like it's going forwards to where you might have to pay even more.
And this is what's interesting about this, is that there is this quite a heavy lobby for that to happen. And on the other side of the coin, there is quite a lot of voices saying, if you do that, you will not raise the money that you think that you will raise, because people will just not cash in their gains. You will have enough people not cashing in gains and paying capital gains tax that you won't raise the money that you think you will. And there's something called the Laffer curve, which is, anybody who's done economics knows about, which is a curve that shows that like the higher a tax rate goes, the more you raise from it as you reach a certain point where you start tipping over the other end, and people will start doing anything they possibly can to avoid it, and the tax take starts to come down. And it's possible that capital gains tax has gone over the top of the Laffer curve. It's possible that it hasn't. It's only one piece of data. It doesn't prove anything, but it is something that's worth looking at. And I think it's also something that's worth looking at in terms of, maybe allowing people to make bigger profits tax-free, removing income tax traps, cutting the inheritance tax rate from 40% to 20% so that people aren't so fussed about it. Maybe that could actually lead to more money coming in rather than less.
I don't think that sort of policy is the trajectory of this current government, though. I could be wrong. Lee, I've been reading again over the last year, change in non-dom status, higher taxes, all of the millionaires are leaving. And then I read last week, actually, maybe those statistics aren't quite as accurate as we thought. But I mean, is there something to be said about if you keep squeezing the rich, they're just going to leave? And then again, like Simon says, you're not going to bring in as much money.
Well, yeah, exactly. It just changed behaviour, doesn't it? Let's face it, the ultra wealthy typically know means and ways to keep their money tax efficient and potentially move around the world rather than just being stuck in one place. And yeah, there has been some big figures, big numbers banded around about this flight of ultra wealthy people. But I think I'm more concerned about not the ultra wealthy, but more the people, the kind of aspirational talent drain that it feels like is happening at the moment with people having their head turned, to move abroad. I remember when I was sort of early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I had quite a few friends actually that did move to Dubai, for example, because it was at the time, and as it is still now, tax free. But most of my friends, obviously, that when I did that were solo. They were single. They were carefree, footloose when I did it. There's been a bit of a shift, it feels like, of actual families uprooting and doing this now and moving away permanently because opportunities to earn their salary tax-free and feel like they have a better standard of life. And I think that's quite a sad kind of state of affairs. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's doing this, but as I said at the top of the show, it feels like there has been a bit of a push away to this kind of thing. And I do agree, if there's a wealth tax, and it's been proved in other countries that have tried to do this before, wealthy will just take flight. Why would they want to keep paying over the odds tax? And a lot of the argument would be that people feel like they've paid their fair share of tax. But I think there's this other misconception about wealth as well, that a lot of people just think that wealth is inherited or, it's just passed down the generations. Yeah, that is true for some people, but for others, they've worked hard to become successful, to be successful in their career, and they feel like they're then being penalised for that success. And I think a wealth tax kind of, okay, we're talking about over £10 million. That's quite a big chunk of change. I just don't think it will do what people think it would do. I think people will just go, nah, that's a step too far, I'm out of it. And I think that is genuinely what would happen.
Do you know what worries me about things like this is not so much about the now, because the 2 million, 5 million, 10 million is enormous about now. But as we know from Frozen, everything, come 20 years or something, 20, 30 years, so many more people will be caught up in these things. So what once, for inheritance tax, a great example, what once was supposed to be for the super, super wealthy is getting more and more average people caught up in it.
Georgie, are you telling us you're going to be earning £10 million in the next
Mate,
couple of years?
honestly, that's the goal. 5 years, Lee.
That's the aspiration that we should be driving. That's the entrepreneurial spirit and the hard work that we should be encouraging.
I was thinking more like the 2 million, but even then that might be a bit pushing it. But you know what I mean? It's the point of the fact that what was, maybe 100 years, but I won't be alive. But, it's that sort of mentality, isn't it?
I 100% agree with this, and we've seen this in action, actually, with a form of wealth tax that was introduced in this country. The pension lifetime allowance was introduced at £1.5 million by a Labour government. It was then raised all the way up to 1.8 million by a Labour government, which the Blair-Brown government, and then the Brown government, that recognised, that you needed to move these things up in line with, in this case, asset price inflation, because people were invested in their pensions, but also like the cost of living and things like that. What will that pension actually buy? Under the Tories, it was then cut all the way to £1 million. At the same time as the cost of living rose substantially, the amount that you'd need in the pension pot to secure the same pension income, asset prices went up and everything like that. It was then finally abolished by them because it was causing so many problems that it was threatening to crash the NHS. But that was the only reason they abolished it. I don't believe that they would have got rid of it if it wasn't for the fact that it was causing so many problems with the NHS. And then there was all these ideas on how to fix it. And then eventually it was just like, if we fix it for the doctors, but we don't fix it for the police officers and everybody else, it just caused problems here. And then in the end, they just went, do you know what, we should just get rid of it. But also, the annual allowance of what you could put into a pension, that was introduced again by Gordon Brown at a much higher level. And then it was lowered and lowered and lowered. So you can't, it's all very well, saying, well, this government, this Labour government, Rachel Reeves, the left. It was the Tories who were responsible for most of this stuff. It was the Tories who did it with the pension lifetime allowance. It was the Tories who did it with the pension annual allowance. It's the Tories who started the income tax freeze. It's the Tories who did nothing about the 60% tax trap. It's the Tories who did nothing about the child benefit tax trap. It's the Tories who allowed our tax system to become such a mess. So yeah, I would say with something like this, one of the reasons why I am against wealth tax is it will start at this level and they'll go, oh, it's not raising enough money, so we'll bring it down to that level. Or actually, we need a bit of money, so bring it down to that level and that level and that level. And frankly, you can't trust whoever's in government not to do that. Doesn't matter what political hue they are of.
Do you remember Biker Grove, PJ and Duncan? The wisdom of Biker Grove. I'll probably cut this out. And they said, once you've had sex, you can't go back to holding hands. It's a bit like that, Simon. The wisdom of Biker Grove.
Just to be clear, they were talking about other people. This wasn't PJ and Duncan.
No, not having sex together.
The main thing I took away from Biker Grove was that you need to be really careful paintballing.
Yeah, poor PJ or Duncan.
Still can't tell the difference.
Oh, dear. How much do you think you need, Lee, to feel wealthy? What do you reckon, Lee? Give me a ballpark. 10 million?
I feel wealthy enough already, Georgie. In other ways, in other ways in my life, it's not just it's not just all about money. To quote Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Now, the reason why I say that, A, I've just come back from Greece. B, that is a comment in our reader comment section on the story we're about to talk to now. But with something PJ and Duncan to Greek philosophers, I mean, what can I say? This show has it all.
The great philosophers of past and current. Yes, the point we're talking about here is because the answer, if we're talking about financial wealth, obviously we're all wealthy in wonderful ways with family and life, etc. But if we're talking about just money here or assets, the answer may have less to do with how much you got in the bank or what house you have or whatever, more about where you live. So the average Briton reckons you need now 3.1 million to consider yourself wealthy. But let's be honest, 3.1 million will go a lot further in the northeast than it will go in Knightsbridge, for example. So, Lee, what is this research? But also, what is wealth? Again, I'm going on the financial aspect here, Lee. What is included? Like pensions?
It's everything. So you're talking about your household net wealth. You're talking about your house price, the amount of money in your bank, pension, investments, everything all clubbed into one. And actually, I think a lot of us have grown up with that mentality of £1 million is a lot of money. And it is a lot of money, but it's not as much, the power of inflation, etc., £1 million actually, it still goes far, and it'd be nice to have £1 million. But I do understand this kind of mentality a little bit now that £1 million feels like it just doesn't cut it to be labelled wealthy anymore. Now, but it does depend, as you say, whereabouts you are in the country. And this was a exclusive research from AJ Bell, quizzed people across the country to ask them how much they said they would need to feel wealthy. Now, unsurprisingly, top of the list is London at £5.9 million. At the bottom of the list is Sheffield at £700,000. So that's a massive, massive difference. But number two, Liverpool, 5.1 million. I mean, that's quite a big amount. And Cardiff and Manchester, 3.5 and 3.4 million, respectively. And then you go down a little bit. Yeah, it's Brighton in 12th with 2 million, and Norwich 14th with 1.9. So it's quite a vary around the country. And I think it's just that kind of notion that £1 million just doesn't feel all that much. So looking at it from a generational point of view, it's actually millennials, of which I fall into the category of, saying that they need £4.1 million to feel wealthy. Those aged 79 and older think 1.9 million is a lot, but time's running out for them. So probably it's that classic chart that you see that the wealth versus time. Once you hit that point, it's time versus wealth that it becomes more important and more poignant. And then the youngest adults, Gen Z, 18 to 27, said £2.6 million. Same for Gen X, which is 44 to 59, 2.6 million. Baby boomers, 60 to 78, say 3 million. So actually millennials really are kind of feeling that kind of pressure, I guess, to be feeling that they should have more money in the bank and be wealthier. But I think the real point of this is, in this survey, 1 in 4 Britons believe that they will one day become wealthy. How much of that is inheritance? I'm thinking what they're getting further down the line is, I don't know, we didn't go into that kind of detail. But the median household wealth in Britain, which is property, savings, pensions and other assets, £293,700. That's according to the most recent Office for National Statistics data. That's some way off £3.1 million, isn't it, Georgie? And actually the top 10% of households total wealth, 1.2 million. Still some way off that 3 million. Household wealth peaks, unsurprisingly, between the ages of 65 to 74. You've probably got a nice pension pot if you've done the right thing. You have probably got a house. Not everyone, but if you got a house and you've probably paid the mortgage off. Peaks at 65, 74, £502,500. And then after that age, it's things like care fees that start to bite. I think that's quite interesting. I think that the 293,000 versus 3.1 million, obviously that skews a lot, because there will be people that have way, way more than that, and there'll be people that have way less than that. I think the notion of being wealthy is a combination of a lot of different things. I think that having enough money at the end of the month, after all of your bills and taxes, just to leap back to what we were saying at the start of the show, I think if you're clearing, a nice amount, and you can either save that, invest that, and have a good time with it and not feel pressured about money, that's what true wealth is to me. To not have arguments with, potentially your partner or family about money, not to have waking up in the morning worried about money. I think that's true wealth, personally, rather than saying I've got £3.1 million of assets, I'm wealthy. I think wealth is having a kind of no pressure or fears about your finances, and being, not being in a huge amount of debt, excluding mortgage, and having the time to be able to enjoy it all. I'm like the Essex philosopher here,
No, 100%. No, I love it. It's PJ and Duncan philosophy.
I think I sit somewhere in between in between PJ and Duncan and Greek philosophy, I hope.
I wonder if it goes to the fact that you are probably in quite a secure position, not in a 3.1 million, but financially you are sensible and you've done the right things. And for someone of your age, you're probably in quite a good position. So you can see where value comes from. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And it hasn't always been that way, George. I came out, I racked up massive student debts that, thankfully I've paid off. I grew up not particularly wealthy, if I'm being quite frank. I've lived on that poverty line. I do know what it's like. And I think that's why, it probably does skew your version of wealth and what feels wealthy.
Yeah. What was interesting is I actually did a TV show about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, looking at the way that £1 million has changed since when the show first came out in 1997 to now. And what's interesting, and this obviously goes a lot into house prices, but back in 1997, you could, with your 1 million, buy about 15 averagely priced homes. Now you can buy about 3.5. Like I say, that obviously includes like house price inflation, which is ridiculous. But it does go to show that in what is my lifetime, what was once a really very healthy figure hasn't got quite the same kudos. Simon?
I mean, I'm looking within a 10-mile radius of where I live, which, to be fair, is one of the most expensive parts of the country. If I was genuinely going to feel wealthy, if I wanted to genuinely feel rich, right? So I think I feel wealthy personally now, right? Okay. But if we're defining this as what I would need to truly feel rich, I'd probably want a big house with some acreage. I'm going to need some land in all honesty, right? Because I'd like some land around me to feel truly rich. You know, you're looking at probably 4 to 5 million for that. I mean, you might squeak in around the 3.5 mark if you could find something pretty good. And I think there's houses I've lusted after with a bit of land, you know, throughout my life that I've seen go for 3.5 million. And then you're going to need enough money so that you don't have to work, but you're also going to need enough money to keep up that £3.5 million house. Going to want a second home? I don't know. I think maybe just holidays. Second homes, to me, I've said this before, it sounds like a lot of work. So yeah, I could see how you probably might need 5 or 6 million just to keep things ticking over. But as I said, it depends on your outlook in life and what you need. If you're just like, actually, do you know what? I'm comfortable. I have a nice life. I don't want for anything. Then you can feel wealthy on a lot less than that. And I do feel wealthy and I have a lot less money than that.
Yeah. But you've also spoken to the experts about what you can do to increase your wealth. Is that right, Lee?
Yeah, we have. And to be honest, with you,
leave the country, move to Dubai, right? Is that?
Well, yeah, exactly. Okay, let's quickly talk through. So, best savings rate is currently 4.5%, right? And that's just at the moment. We've had a spell of savings rates being far lower than that, and in recent times, you would have been able to get in very recent times a bit higher than that. Now, using our long-term savings calculator, over 40 years, you'd need to save £750 per month to reach your £1 million pot. To get a £3 million pot, you need to do £2,250 every month to reach your goal in 40 years. Now, what I would say about that sounds absolutely unfeasible, but a couple of examples in here. You could be talking a little bit here about your pension. It's dependent on your employer, but they would probably match your contributions and you get the tax relief on it. Some employers will, after a certain amount of time within a workplace, will double contributions or add a bit extra on there. So if you think about that, that's quite good. I'm currently saving not £750 per month, but £75 per month alongside my wife. So she's putting in £75 per month as well in a big savings pot, investment pot actually for our children. And I've seen the effects of compounding of that already just over the last 6 years and how that mounts up. So I think that £750 and £2,250 every month is a lot of money. 99.9% of people cannot stretch to that kind of level. But it is important to even take baby steps. It's probably not going to make you £1 million, but it is a good habit to get into. Now, according to the experts in here as well, it would take investing £1,500 a month over 40 years to reach a £3 million pot. So that's a little bit less. And in an investment point of view, they say about £500 a month would make you a millionaire. That's allowing for inflation and investment charges. But, as they say here, your million or 3 million won't go as far in 40 years as inflation will chip away at your spending power over the decades. But Jason Hollands from Evelyn Partners here, who's a wealth manager, he says, alongside the effect of inflation and lifestyle costs, the tax burden will also impact how wealthy you'll feel, as it is net income and net wealth that matters when it comes to your ability to enjoy travel, nice clothes, dining out regularly and purchasing new cars, as well as helping out younger family members and leaving enough for old age. With the tax burden at the highest level since the Second World War, many people who might on paper be high earners or have £1 million ISAs and pensions won't be feeling wealthy.
That's it for part 1.
I'm joined now by Lambert and Georgie of Charles Stanley Direct for our weekly Investing Explained feature. Lambert, got a question here from a reader in 2 parts. I'd like to invest in gold in my ISA. How can I do this? And what is a sensible portion of my portfolio to put in it?
Thank you for the question, Simon. Just answering the first one about how can I invest gold in an ISA. Now, you can't hold physical gold directly in an ISA, but you can invest in gold through physically backed ETCs or exchange traded commodities, or funds that essentially track the price of gold. These can be bought and sold very easily like any other share and are widely available on most investment platforms that have an ISA. Now, for the second question about what's a suitable amount, it really just depends on your goals and kind of risk appetite. Gold as an asset is generally seen as a store value rather than a growth asset, as it doesn't generate income like shares, bonds, or property. But that being said, it can be a useful hedge against inflation or market volatility. For diversification, many investors consider allocating a modest portion, say 5 to 10% of their portfolio to gold. But it's important to tailor this to your personal circumstances. And also on that, it's best practice to rebalance your exposure during market upside and downside.
Lambert, thank you very much.
Welcome back. With speculation mounting about what tax rises the Chancellor might bring in the autumn budget, as we mentioned earlier, the nation's financial advisors are having their work cut out, fielding a rush of questions from worried savers. But what are the most common concerns and what advice are they given? Lee, I imagine inheritance tax and pensions doubtless features rather strongly, but you've looked at 6 of the big questions. What are they?
Yes, so Harvey Dorset, who does a lot of our financial planning stories, I sat down with him a little while ago and we were sort of freshening out some story ideas. And the premise of this story was to speak to 8 different financial advisors and for them to each give us the 3 questions they are being asked the most this year. And then we aggregated kind of what they were saying to get the 6 most asked questions for all of those financial advisors. They're in order in this story of how frequently they were asked, and some of these were mentioned by every single financial advisor. But it was just to get a feel of what people are kind of like most worried about and most thinking about. Now, if you're using a financial advisor, you probably do feel wealthy. Maybe not £1 million wealthy or £3 million wealthy, but you might do. And you're right. The number one question is, how can I avoid the inheritance tax? And that advisors us in a deluge of questions about mitigating IHT. And then actually the second most asked question feeds into that very nicely, because it's, will my pension pot be an inheritance tax trap? Now, from April 2027, pensions are set to be included in IHT calculations. It means more people will be dragged into having a potential IHT liability by this. And it's a key concern for clients. And actually, we had a story this week suggesting that there's been a shift in habits again. Because I think shift in habits feels like the kind of buzz term for our podcast this year. Shift in habits in older people gifting out surplus income and just making small gifts to family members, especially children and grandchildren, even charities and friends, because they are concerned about their looming changes to IHT. And it's going to drag a lot more people's assets into an inheritance tax kind of liability from under 2 years' time now. And I think the closer we get to that, the more panic there's going to be. Number 3, most asked question is, can I enjoy an early retirement? Again, I think lots of people will have this on their mind. And again, it all just depends on how well you have managed to save into the pension and how well you've been able to save elsewhere. Is now the best time to invest? With question number 4. And actually, the reason why that was asked has been because of the tariff. A lot of clients are mentioning to financial advisors about the tariff, worries over the tariffs that Donald Trump was going to do. There's lots of headwinds in investing. But at the same time, FTSE 100 is at a record high, and we've seen a few peaks and troughs this year. But on the whole, the kind of global markets have held up fairly well, given everything that's been going on. Number 5 is, should I act before the autumn budget? I always think that's one of those questions that you shouldn't try and preempt any of the changes. And actually, that's one of the comments we have from a financial advisor in here, saying some clients try to preempt the changes that any government will make in the next budget. The best course of action is often to sit and wait until closer to the time. And actually, the last budget last year, there were so many rumours flying around and people doing things in a blind panic that didn't materialise, that we argued on this podcast that there should be way less kite flying, for example, and more kind of concrete, no, we will not be doing this. And another example of that was the whole cash ISA fiasco. Just put it off the table, just say it's off the table. And then actually, lastly, it was kind of one of those things where you're trying to write a story like this and you think, how many people does this actually encompass? But it was mentioned by quite a lot of the financial clients, and that is, will my business face a tax raid? A large part of that is inheritance tax allowances for small business owners and farmers, set to be slashed beyond the first £1 million of combined agriculture and business assets. Full inheritance relief is going to be reduced for half from April 2026, essentially creating an inheritance tax rate of 20%. Many business owners and farmers want to know if they should sell up or pass on wealth now, or if they can find some other way to avoid their legacy coming with a huge tax bill attached. Of course, when you read it out like that, that makes a lot of sense. We saw the protests in the winter from farmers who were upset about this move. Chancellor stuck to her guns. People are wondering what they should do next, and time is running out, Georgie. Selling a business, for example, is a very complex state of affairs, depending on what your business is. The time is running out. We are, 8 months away from April. Selling a business is, I've seen it firsthand. It's a lot of work and it is very difficult, and it's a big decision. So they are 6 huge things that are being asked to financial advisors at the moment. They are the 6 most common things. That I think there should be some honourable mentions here of things that didn't make the cut. And actually, looking in our reader comments, one of the big ones is how to afford care fees and how to fund your care, because it is so expensive, so expensive. And it's only getting more expensive, and it is a real drain and a suck on your wealth.
Yep, Simon. Lee mentioned there about investing. I can't let it go. Is now a good time to invest? With all the stuff that's going on over in the States, will he, won't he? He will. Is now a good time to invest?
That is a question that people always ask themselves, and they ask it when things are going badly, and they ask it when things are going well. There's an old saying, stock markets climb a wall of worry. Basically, people are always worrying about stuff. Yes, the market goes up. If you're not in it, you ain't going to win it. You're not going to make those gains. People were freaking out. What are we in? August now, isn't it? So 4 months ago, we were peak tariff freak out. Everybody worrying. And what happened? Trump introduced his pause. Markets soared. US stock market that had been written off by lots of people is riding at all-time highs. FTSE 100 has been riding at all-time highs. Investors are doing great. Now the worry is over irrational exuberance and the return of the tariffs, which Donald Trump has brought back today in various forms. But, what could he do next? Markets are getting some clarity in terms of, right, this is what the tariff is. This is what the tariff isn't. We know what you're getting. We know what you're getting. They're not as high as they were. They're still higher than they were before the start of the year. There is this taco trade, Trump always chickens out trade. As I've said before, I wouldn't bet on him always chickening out, because the more people say Trump always chickens out, the greater the chances that at some point he decides to prove us all wrong and not chicken out. I wouldn't necessarily want to play a game of chicken with Donald Trump. You just never know what he might do. So I would be cautious, but the thing to do is to invest regularly in that case. You're most at risk if you stick in a big lump sum and then the markets suddenly tumble. And if you invest regularly, you do this thing called pound cost averaging. You're benefiting from the gains when markets are high, but you're getting to buy a bit more when markets are low. And you just keep going over the years and you allow your gains to compound. And then it's a way of getting rich slowly, I'd also just be very careful about being overexposed to some stuff. And anything that you see going up lots and chasing gains and thinking, yeah, great, I'll have some of that. If you ever think, yeah, great, I'll have some of that, take a pause before you put your money in.
Finally, Simon, this is an interesting one. Read a question. Sticking with the whole Rachel Reeves tax raid theme that's sort of gone through this show, I'm not, this is the reader question. I'm one of the people that will be adversely affected by the raid on unused pension pots. Currently, this change will mean an additional inheritance tax charge of about £270,000 for me if I died. I have been looking at the gifting rules, and the sums that you can give away are measly. They're another thing that haven't changed, aren't they? £3,000 a year or unlimited £250 gifts, but only one per person. However, if I can gift £250 free of inheritance tax to as many people as I wish, could I do that? And then those people give all that money to my 2 daughters. So could I gift a total of 100,000 to 400 different people, and they each in turn make £250 gifts to my daughters, giving them 50,000 each and thus avoiding inheritance tax? I don't know 400 people that I would do this with, but Simon, an interesting question.
Brilliant question. Best question of the year. I take my hat off to the reader who sent this into our inbox. No, you have not come up with a cunning ruse to avoid inheritance tax. As I suspect our reader may have thought, it was probably unlikely this was going to work. We'll set aside the logistics for one moment, which are tricky, ranging from those 400 people are probably going to want to be paid a little bit of a cut for doing this, aren't they? You're not just going to give them 250 and then they give the 250 back. You probably have to pay them all at least a fiver. And even then, is that enough money to get someone to do something, even if it's something really simple? You know, ignoring the bit where once you've sent someone £250, you have no control over whether they send that £250 back to where they're meant to have sent it to. I suppose you could try to get them to sign a contract, but we're seeing the expenses of this ruse climb, aren't we? Or you just expect a certain amount of wastage of people going, yeah, I mean, it would be nice to earn the £5, but I'll keep the 250, thanks. And you're probably not going to come after me for it in court. But leaving aside those logistics, unfortunately, as our expert, a Mr. David Denton of Quilter Cheviot explains, unfortunately, no. The UK introduced the General Anti-Abuse Rule in 2013, and this is designed to target those taxpayers who avoid paying tax in ways that are not in the spirit of the rules, despite some aspects being potentially legal. Abusive arrangements can include as a series of preordained steps, where HMRC would look at the overall effect of the series or combination of transactions in order to identify the real purpose. The GAAR applies to a number of personal taxes, including inheritance tax. So if enough tax was at risk, it could come into effect here, given there is a pre-planned element and it involves a number of people. I have an interesting story on this involving the sale of our first flat, where it turned out that the buyers wanted to, it was a couple, one of them was going to buy the flat off us and then sell it instantaneously to the other one for a nominal sum, therefore avoiding stamp duty. The way this worked was, and this was a scheme that I believe was marketed to people at the time, is you did this, you notified HMRC of what you were doing and that you therefore did not owe them any stamp duty. And if they didn't come after you for the stamp duty, I believe it was within a year, but I might be wrong here. Because you had told them what you were doing, you'd notified them and you weren't just like, hiding it. If they didn't come after you for a year, then you didn't have to pay the stamp duty, and these schemes would indemnify people against it. Anyway, our solicitor wasn't having any of this. Even though actually she wouldn't have been implicated at all in it. That was my argument. I was like, why does it matter to you? It's not your responsibility. And like at this point, I was like, is this going to crash our sale? In the end, the people who were buying decided not to do this, and it all just moved along, and the transaction happened as normal. But that's the kind of thing that this rule would catch out. little cunning ruses like that actually may possibly, before 2013, you might have been able to get away with this. Although, as I said, logistics, difficult.
So in some, it's the spirit of the law that also counts.
Yeah, it does. And this is to try to catch people who are doing things that are quite clearly wrong and quite clearly designed to evade tax or avoid tax in a way that looks... So evading is illegal, avoiding is not. But avoiding tax to the level that it becomes evading.
I know, but there's got to be no one at HMRC that if anyone actually manages to pull this off would just be like, high five you for the effort if you get that over the line.
We'll send you like a special badge or something.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Tax Dodger of the Year.
Yeah. Kudos to you for that effort.
Yeah, you're not just like someone who just did it in a classic, very wealthy, move your money way. You made a real effort here.
Exactly. Think how much you'd get paid for doing that sort of work. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, like in my kids' school reports, where you get the score, which is done in numbers now rather than letters, for achievement, but then you also get the attitude to learning one. And it's actually, you say to the kids, it's more, the attitude to learning one is more important.
A+ for effort.
And in this case, the attitude to tax avoidance is very high.
Committed. All right, Simon, stat of the week, please.
All right. 1,000%. That is how much Rolls-Royce's shares are up since the new boss, Turbo Tufan, as he is known, took over a few years ago at a point where he said Rolls-Royce was a burning platform. The share price had crashed. They'd had, the COVID problems, the pandemic problems, the lockdown problems. Shares were almost priced for it going bust. If you had invested at that point, you would have made an 11-fold return on your money.
All right, that's it for this week. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for listening. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app, of course. And if you have any comments or questions for the team or anything you'd like them to look into, Simon.
You can email us at podcast@thisismoney.co.uk. Can you come up with a tax dodging ruse to top the one that we just talked about? But it has to be that it could potentially work, okay?
Creative.
Creative, but not ludicrous, all right? Those are the rules. And we're not advocating doing this.
No.
Just asking us the question so we can tell you that you cannot do it. Okay? Just be 100% clear to anybody who's listening, okay? We're not condoning tax evasion or tax avoidance. We are just saying, send us your questions and we will tell you that you are not allowed to do this. Or if you have anything else to tell us, then please email us at podcast@thisismoney.co.uk or come to thisismoney.co.uk/podcast to leave your comments in the reader comments and join the debate.
And if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.
Take control of your finances with Charles Stanley Direct. Invest, save, coach, or plan. Using technology where it's helpful and people where it matters. Our website and app make trading cost-effective and flexible. But we're more than just an online investment service. We're here for you regardless of your financial needs or if your life takes an unexpected turn. Your finances, your way. Take control today with Charles Stanley Direct. Sign up now.
Investment involves risk.